Is apathy actually all that cool? These are questions I found myself asking when I listened to Charlie XCX's new album, Music, Fashion, Film. The title is repeated in the song SS26, where the sentiment is essentially encapsulated by the lyric, "We're running on a runway that goes straight to hell." The rest of the album has a similar ironic detachment in terms of social commentary, with it all feeling like a dead-eye remark about the hellish state of the modern culture and society that we're in. Man, I decided to handwrite my script for today, and I can't read it. My handwriting fucking sucks, bro. Songs like Card Declined and Yeah have that Gen X irony presentation on lock. Even though Charlie X is a millennial, it is still very reminiscent of the grunge rock of the 90s as well as college rock. I can see so much of Charlie's inspiration for this record being the stuff that Kurt Cobain was inspired by, that kind of really oddball, extremely ironic, we don't know what level of irony we're operating on anymore, levels of just obscure rock. And this whole connection to college rock or grunge rock of the 90s is very apt because this is supposed to be Charlie's rock album, something that I do find very fascinating. For some odd reason, I've made it a point to talk about the intersections of rock and pop music in the modern day, so obviously Charlie saying "the dance floor is dead" would be of interest to me. First of all, the lead single and the thesis statement of the record, rock music, is definitely making fun of the perception rock music has among modern pop music listeners, which is more proof that it's going to take a lot to make rock back culturally. Yet the sound, in an attempt to still be very Charlie, which it definitely is succeeding at, is more electronic than it is outright rock. It doesn't commit to the style of rock music that she's detailing in the song. You can't really bang your head to any of these songs, they're way too slow. And I don't mind that, I still really like Charlie XCX's music, Brat is really good. I'm even a kinda low-key defender of Crash, if I'm being honest with y'all. And so I don't mind that this album is still very Charlie. I would hate for her to sort of remove her musical identity just to fit into the constraints of a genre, but I thought there'd be a little bit more commentary on the concept of rock music in the popular music world, because that seems to be what the lead single was about, but it's actually a lot more of an introspective piece, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And actually, just to clarify, I appreciate the latter more than the former. Yeah, my biggest problem overall with the record is that it's very slow and kind of languid in its composition, and that isn't a bad thing, it just leads to the energy feeling, like I said earlier, very apathetic, which isn't the bad thing, it's just not all that much of interest to me. There are more emotional and energetic elements on the record, which I appreciate and are my favorite elements. I think my favorite song so far is Camera, because it has that classic Charlie XCX bounce that I've grown to really like from her so much over time, and it balances her emotional insecurity with the social commentary of the world we currently live in. It's also the least rock-sounding song, I think, on the record, so that might be saying something. It's not like I disagree with any of her social commentary at all. Like the previously mentioned Card Declined, I do think that whole song and its commentary on consumerism and social media is pretty apt. Commenting on how people's entire personalities and hobbies have now consisted of just buying and shopping into oblivion. The dire tone of the song is supposed to reflect the negativity of this fact, but there isn't much else to say other than the thing exists. If Charlie needed to be the one to tell you that we're all cooked, then so be it, but I'm looking for something that's a little bit more curious and substantive in its discussion of this topic personally. But that doesn't mean it's a bad song, it just means that I'm really not going to visit it as much. In terms of sound, I think the closest thing that I can kind of pinpoint this record to is indie sleaze in a lot of ways. To clarify, indie sleaze is not like a genre of music, it was a social movement, happened with the millennials, really in Charlie's era, and the sound of it was very, very much rock kind of intersected with electronic moments. I mean, from very early on in rock's history, electronics and synthesizers have always been involved, but especially in the 2010s, that sort of crossover with EDM in certain ways, I think was very interesting, and that was kind of what the indie sleazers were listening to. You know, your classic garage rock revival slash EDM house playlists. It makes sense that that would be the closest thing that Charlie would end up getting to with the sound of this record, considering she's more of the latter genre crossing over into the former, right? And it's not that I don't think they can't produce the guitars properly. I mean, she's definitely willing to go real chunky with it. The biggest problem a lot of people have with when rock music tries to cross over into the popular sphere is that they immediately tone back the guitars and the drums. And this record doesn't at least do that. Although I would say the drums overall are probably the weakest part. It's not that I don't mind electronic drums on a rock song. There are plenty of songs that are rock songs that have electronic drums that work really well. It's just that I think they need to be a little bit more unique if they're not going to be organic. Like the drum patterns need to have a little bit more to them. They need to be a little more substantive. And that is not necessarily needed for a different genre because of the other things that aid in making the song, more enjoyable. Okay, quick indie sleaze music recommendations, I guess, off the just top of my head. Let's see. LCD Sound System, MGMT, the Yeah Yeah Yeahs. I would say the Strokes, but they're in the timeout corner right now because of that most recent album. I didn't really like it, but I mean, the older stuff, definitely. Do I have any more examples? I don't think off the top of my head I do. You know what? I'll make a playlist, and I'll put it in the description below with my indie sleaze recommendations. Hope that's helpful in somehow. But my ramblings about the state of rock music aside, I would say, like I was clarifying earlier, that the emotional aspects of Charlie's life that she details throughout this record are the most interesting parts. Her fear of being in a committed relationship while her mental state is still not the best with I'm Afraid is a very interesting and kind of heartbreaking exploration, and I really appreciate that from her. And we really get to the whole point, the whole why of this record once we get to the final song, Nothing Lasts Forever, featuring David Cronenberg. I think Cronenberg's speech at the very end really spoke to what I think Charlie's biggest anxieties were and the kind of conclusion she comes to in terms of those anxieties with what he says. A lot of this album, on songs like Camera and such, really contend with the idea of her as an actual popular musician and celebrity. I think the line in Camera is, "Can I really be a girl on the screen when I'm 34?" Contending with fame in a way that doesn't necessarily feel like it's overplayed or overwrought. And I can really appreciate that because when people start to talk about the industry or their own fame, it can get a little boring to me sometimes, but I think Charlie does a really good job through her simplistic lyrics, because it's not like she's writing the most complicated sentences of all time, but I think her directness is actually one of her biggest skills. She seems to be very afraid of the idea of being remembered or having to contend with the thought of her existing everywhere all at once, all the time. And so when Cronenberg says oblivion is freedom, and the repetition at the very end of the line, "They are dead, they are gone, no one lasts forever," while some people probably find that very existentially terrifying, to me it seems like a sort of cooing and comforting thing for Charlie. Like the repetition of it feels like a lullaby into a state of comfort. I did also watch the little short film that she released, which is really just behind the scenes footage of things with commentary on each song interspliced in between. And I would say that her admission, or other people's admission, that Charlie's whole identity is music, fashion, and film was a very interesting insight. Like on SS26, she is contending with the idea that we're almost distracting ourselves. The masses are distracting themselves from the real problems, which are not listed at all in the song, with music, fashion, film, and that she's essentially complacent and contributing to it. Now, this is a very, very common sentiment in a lot of pop music, believe it or not. I would argue it's definitely a post-9/11 sort of sentiment in American popular music. I would say that impulse comes from the fact that the war didn't really inspire any political music. It did a little bit, but not enough to really be defined by the politics of the time. Most of pop music was yeah, a sort of like frilly escape from the huge impending traumas. I mean, I think of the most comparable song, honestly, to this whole era being the song Hollywood by Madonna, which I think a lot of people don't like, but I honestly have a really large soft spot for. I think American Life in general as an album is really bad, but Todd in the Shadows made the definitive discussion of that record, in my opinion, so you should check out that video if you haven't. But I really like the song Hollywood, even though its commentary is so shallow and has no interest in asking why things are the way they are in Hollywood. But that's Madonna. And this is Charlie XCX. And so while I still am not that jazzed about the fact that, again, a lot of her commentary doesn't go past thing exists, and she doesn't say the reasons why people are so upset or why things are so bad or what could possibly be done about them, even on an interpersonal level, it's better overall because it is at least pointing to something a little bit more specific. I think maybe the point of Charlie's song is that we're supposed to contend with the sadness or the darkness of, yeah, we're all fucked and you're not doing anything about it, and not offering the solution to us because that would be too comfortable. We're supposed to linger in the uncomfortableness, I think, of that statement. I already do enough of that in my everyday life, especially with all the books and shit that I read, so I don't really need Charlie to do it for me, but if it's very helpful and functional for others, then I guess that's great. So as much as I did enjoy this Charlie album, and I would overall recommend it to people, there was a different album that came out like late last year that did all of the things that I wanted out of this album, like really good. Social commentary with a cool rock veneer, with more emotional, introspective relationships, storytelling, all within this very like inviting atmosphere. It was Everyone's a Star. Ignore the fact that I'm literally wearing the t-shirt right now. Let's not talk about that. I shill for Five Sauce too often on this channel. I realize that I do. I should probably go at least one video without talking about them. Gun to my head, I can't find myself not doing that. Because Five Sauce are a rock band and have instruments that they play and such, they were really able to create a more lush sound space with Everyone's a Star. And also it's really coming on to that, like, you know, Gen Zer irony. Again, they're also millennials, the members of Five Sauce, but like they're really tapping into that sort of irony that Gen Z loves so much. Honestly, both records really have that classic balance between ironic detachment and what we're talking about, you know, to keep that veneer of cool, contrasted with the very, very sincere and very, very emotional storytelling in terms of relationships and personal, you know, expression and ideology. So if you're somebody who felt as though music, fashion, film didn't necessarily have enough rock elements for you, that wasn't one of my problems with the record, but if it was for you, I would recommend checking out Everyone's a Star, because it does have a lot more of that like classic current of modern rock sound, even though I would argue Charlie's album is actually heavier because of its uses of very, very sludgy guitars. And you can see the reason why Charlie is so comfortable with doing that is because of her, you know, dip into the indie underground with hyperpop and stuff. Like, she's very, very comfortable with sounds that will make average music listeners uncomfortable, if that makes sense. Also, the title is obviously clickbait. I hope that was well known and obvious. I don't care whether this album is rock or not, but apparently it gets people mad and it gets you to click. So maybe you should analyze your own behavior in terms of watching videos if you won't click on something that has a more positive thumbnail. Overall, I really did enjoy listening to the album because it's so short. It's only 30 minutes long. It's just a really easy listen. It just goes down real easy. But in terms of like individual songs I want to come back to, I would say Camera's probably the only one. Some of the more 80s new wavy inspired songs like Metal Magic Montana and maybe Wink Wink, although the sentiment of that song is a little bit goofy, so I don't really imagine myself listening to it as often, but at least the sonic palettes of those records are more up my alley in terms of what I actually like to listen to. In terms of the heavier stuff, I'm not really going to go to Charlie for that, I'll be completely honest with you, so I never see myself listening to songs like Card Declined or Persona really that often. but I appreciate the fact that it's maybe scaring the normies a little bit, you know? I think before she started doing the album cycle for this record, she was talking about wanting to enter the Kia Asylum again or whatever, you know, going back to being a little obscure, which this album kind of touches on, you know, that sentiment. And so, I mean, some of these songs may be the way to do that. Who knows? But overall, I would just say I prefer a more energetic and faster tempo Charlie than anything else. And this album is a lot more chill in a way, if that makes sense. If not chill, then, like I said earlier, slow paced. I think that's all I have to say. There's definitely more to say, but I'm trying to not be someone who talks for hours on the internet in every single video. This is my more chill kind of side channel. So check out the main channel if you're interested in Disney Channel and sitcoms and such. And subscribe here if you want to hear more pop music takes and discussions. I recorded something like a bajillion years ago that I might eventually finish editing at some point because it became really like chill and long. It's kind of like sort of like a podcasty kind of thing where I talk about the best and worst hit songs of the 2010s. So we'll see if that comes out. And also, the video on Let Go by Avril Lavigne should come out, but it's on delay, kind of. I thought it was going to come out before this, but then the Charlie album came out, and so I ended up talking about it first. Oh, and then I have some very, very exciting stuff in terms of 5 Seconds of Summer. Some actual 5-sauce dedicated videos. So anyways, that's all. Thanks for watching. Bye!